This is the moment everything changed, right? The one memory I know I'm going to carry with me forever, even though I wish I could forget how my heart was beating that night. It was loud, heavy, and completely out of control, like a trapped bird trying to smash its way out of my chest. See, I was just starting college, fresh out of high school, full of that clumsy optimism you only have before the world shows you how complicated things really are. I got lucky and landed a pretty sweet apartment off campus. My roommate was this guy named Ethan, a year older, pretty chill, mostly kept to himself, which suited me fine. We had the classic setup: 2 bedrooms, a shared bathroom, and a kitchen that was always mostly clean. Everything was totally normal, completely routine, until his older sister, Chloe, came to visit. Chloe, man, even saying her name now sends a weird jolt through me. She was 3 years older than Ethan, maybe 22, and she had this way about her, this silent confidence that made everyone else in the room feel like they were trying too hard. She was just visiting for a long weekend, helping Ethan organize some stuff. I'd seen her a couple of times passing through the living room, always dressed casually, maybe sweatpants and a messy bun, but even that somehow looked intentional. We hadn't really spoken, just the quick, awkward nods you exchange with your roommate's family. The atmosphere in our apartment shifted the moment she arrived. There was this unspoken tension, this feeling like the air itself was holding its breath. I kept finding excuses to be in the kitchen or near the living room, even though I knew I should be studying for my psych class. I couldn't explain it, but every time she laughed at something Ethan said, I felt a ridiculous, childish jealousy. I knew I was totally out of my league, a freshman nobody staring at his roommate's older sister. Pathetic, right? But then came Friday night. Ethan went out with his friends to some party, leaving Chloe and me alone in the apartment. I was sitting on my bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to pretend I wasn't listening to the sound of her humming softly in the room across the hall. I told myself to just relax, maybe watch a movie, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. The profile picture was a blurry photo of a cityscape. I almost dismissed it as a spam text, but then I saw the message. It was short, only 7 words, and it was directed straight at me. I immediately knew who it was, even though I didn't have her number saved. It was Chloe, and what she wrote wasn't just unexpected, it was absolutely terrifying. The text read, "Come upstairs, but don't knock." Why upstairs? We were on the first floor. And why, for God's sake, couldn't I knock? The moment I read that text, my entire body went rigid. Up until that point, my life was organized, predictable. I was the guy who made a schedule and actually stuck to it. My goal for freshman year was simple: ace my classes, make a few decent friends, and avoid doing anything spectacularly stupid. Chloe's text ripped that plan to shreds in an instant. It wasn't just the words. It was the fact that she had somehow gotten my number without asking me, without saying a word, and then sent this cryptic command. Let me rewind a bit so you understand the dynamic. Ethan and I weren't close friends. We were roommates by chance. He was in pre-med, laser-focused, kind of distant, which made our shared living space a lot less stressful than some of the horror stories I'd heard. The only thing we truly shared was this quiet, unspoken acknowledgement that our first-floor apartment was a temporary bunker against the chaos of college life. Chloe, on the other hand, was the total opposite of calm. She was majoring in film and theater up in the city, the creative type. When she talked about her life, her eyes lit up with this restless energy. She was magnetic, the kind of person who walked into a room and instantly became the center of gravity, whether she wanted to or not. Ethan told me she was home this weekend because she was dealing with a tough creative block, a screenplay she couldn't finish or something like that. He said she always got moody when she was stuck, retreating into herself. That was the official story. The truth was, I'd been watching her. Not in a creepy way, just observing. I noticed the way she'd pace the living room late at night, a coffee mug cold in her hands, her brow furrowed. I noticed the quick, nervous checks she'd make of her phone before she put it face down on the counter. She looked beautiful, yes, but she also looked deeply troubled, like she was carrying a weight that wasn't hers. I actually felt a pang of concern for her, mixed in with all the freshman awkwardness. I wanted to ask if she was okay, but the opportunity never felt right. She was Ethan's sister, not my responsibility. Now, Her text made it my responsibility. Come upstairs, but don't knock. The biggest problem was that our apartment was strictly a first-floor unit. There was no upstairs. Unless she meant the rarely used, rickety attic access panel hidden behind a dusty closet in the back hallway. I suddenly remembered Ethan mentioning something about it when we first moved in, a small, dark storage space that was mostly forgotten. But why would she be up there? And why the intense secrecy? My rational brain was screaming at me to delete the text, ignore the situation, and go back to scrolling. But the image of Chloe's troubled face flashed in my mind, and the suspense was too thick to breathe through. I had to know what was going on. I slid off my bed, moving toward the back hall, the silence of the apartment suddenly deafening, hoping Ethan didn't decide to come home early. My hand reached for the closet doorknob, but I stopped. If she was in trouble, was I walking into something I couldn't handle? The doorknob felt freezing cold against my palm, a stark contrast to the heat rising in my chest. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn back, but the picture of Chloe's intense, sad eyes kept me rooted there. This wasn't a casual late-night chat. This was a direct violation of every unspoken boundary in the apartment, in my life, even. I quietly twisted the knob and pulled the closet door open just enough to slip inside. It smelled like old cardboard and dust, and the air immediately felt heavy and still. I reached up and fumbled for the light switch. When the bare bulb flickered on, I could see it, the square outline of the attic hatch, tucked into the ceiling above a stack of empty storage bins. How did Chloe even get up there? It was maybe 10 feet off the ground. There was a folding step ladder leaning against the wall, but it was caked in dust and looked like it hadn't been touched in years. This felt less like a quirky hiding spot and more like a deliberate attempt to be inaccessible. I pulled the rickety aluminum ladder down, trying to make as little noise as possible, but the metal groaned in protest, a sound that echoed way too loudly in the confined space. I froze, waiting, but only the low hum of the refrigerator broke the silence. Taking a deep breath, I started to climb. Each step was unnerving, the ladder swaying slightly under my weight. As my head finally cleared the opening, I was met not with a storage space, but a makeshift, tiny sanctuary. It was dark, save for the glow of a single battery-powered lantern sitting on the floor. Chloe was sitting cross-legged on a drop cloth spread over the dusty wood, her back leaning against a stack of boxes. She wasn't moody or stressed anymore. She looked intensely focused, maybe even scared. She held her finger up to her lips, the universal sign for silence, and then pointed to her phone, which was propped up and recording video on a small tripod. My confusion was immense. Why was she recording? Before I could even whisper a question, she looked past me, toward the attic opening, her eyes wide with sudden panic. She mouthed 2 words that hit me like a physical punch, forcing me to duck down instantly, hiding myself behind the wall of the opening. He's back. Who was back? And why did my presence suddenly feel like a terrible, dangerous mistake? My heart hammered against the inside of the attic opening. I stayed crouched low, completely unseen from the hallway below, adrenaline pumping a cocktail of fear and utter bewilderment through my veins. He's back. The phrase was a sharp, cold dagger. Ethan? No, Ethan wouldn't just show up quietly and sneak around. He wasn't that subtle. Besides, Chloe's terror wasn't the kind you felt for a brother. It was the raw, primal fear of an intruder. I risked a small glance down, peering through the gap between the hatch opening and the wall. The light from the hallway downstairs was weak, but I could just make out a shadow moving near the back of the apartment, near the kitchen. The movement was slow, deliberate. Definitely not Ethan. Chloe reached out a hand and silently pressed her palm against my cheek, a gesture that was both comforting and utterly desperate, urging me to stay down. The sudden intimacy of her touch, even in that terrifying moment, felt like a current running through me. I realized she wasn't just hiding. She was using the attic as a surveillance post, and now I was trapped here with her, complicit in whatever danger she was facing. A soft scraping sound came from directly below us, the sound of the bathroom door, right beneath the closet, opening. We froze, barely breathing. The man downstairs was checking the apartment, moving slowly, testing doors. I could hear the faint click of the bathroom light switch. Then, Chloe reached into a small canvas bag beside her and pulled out a burner phone. She typed something furiously, her face illuminated by the harsh blue light. and then held the phone out to me. The screen showed a single text message, not sent by her, but received. I know where you are. Tell me where the drive is. Suddenly, the whole situation snapped into focus. This wasn't a creative block. This was something serious, something dangerous involving evidence or information. She was running from someone who was actively hunting her. And that person was now inside our apartment. I looked at her, my mind racing. I wanted to ask what drive, who this guy was, and why she had dragged me into this. But she just shook her head, her eyes pleading. Then, she pointed the burner phone at the camera recording on the tripod, and then to the dusty floor near the attic ladder. She wanted me to hide something, right now, to give her time. I immediately saw a loose floorboard near the edge of the attic opening. The perfect hiding spot. I was about to reach for it when a loud, metallic thud echoed from the hallway downstairs. The sound of something heavy, maybe a tool or a weapon, being dropped. The slow footsteps started again, heading directly toward the closet door, directly beneath us. The breathing in the attic was ragged mine. Chloe's face was pale, but her eyes held a strange, determined spark. She leaned in close, so close I could feel the rush of her scared breath, and whispered, I didn't mean for you to see this, but you can't tell anyone, not even Ethan. Please. The heavy footsteps stopped right outside the closet door. The air thickened. We could both hear the subtle shift of the doorknob beginning to turn. Was this the end? The doorknob turned with a deliberate, slow click. Chloe and I braced ourselves, ready for the door to burst open and expose our hiding spot. But the door didn't open. Instead, a voice, a familiar, smooth, and chillingly controlled voice, called out from the hallway, just inches below our feet. Chloe, are you up here? I just got back. Why is the closet door open? It wasn't the voice of a hulking, professional criminal. It was Ethan, my roommate. The man hunting Chloe wasn't some anonymous thug. It was her own brother. The realization slammed into me with sickening force. But before I could process why Ethan was involved, Chloe's entire demeanor changed. The fear was replaced by a flash of absolute, cold fury. She grabbed my arm, her grip vice-tight, and pointed to the propped-up camera on the tripod. It wasn't pointed at us or at the door. It was pointed at the storage boxes. She quickly snatched up a small, unlabeled hard drive from her bag, looked me directly in the eye, and whispered one final, terrifying command. He thinks it's in the boxes. You need to keep him busy. Now, the person I trusted, my calm, quiet roommate, was the threat, and the girl I barely knew was counting on me to lie to him, maybe even risk myself, to protect whatever was on that drive. I had no time to think. Ethan was standing right below us, his voice laced with forced concern that now sounded completely sinister. I had to create a distraction, right now, before he spotted the stepladder or the open hatch. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I forced myself to be loud. Ethan? Yeah, I'm up here. Sorry, man. Just trying to find those old textbooks you said were up here. Didn't know you were back. I heard the quick, sharp intake of breath from Chloe behind me, a silent thank you, and a warning all in one. Textbooks? In the attic? Ethan's footsteps moved closer, directly under the hatch. I could feel the tension radiating off him. You shouldn't be up there. It's rickety. Just come down. Yeah, sorry, I'm just climbing down now. I lied, my voice shaking a little less now that I was acting. As I spoke, I slowly, silently lifted the floorboard Chloe had indicated. She immediately slid the hard drive into the dark, dusty void beneath the floor joists and silently sealed the board back in place. It was masterful, seamless. Then, I started to descend the ladder, forcing the metal to creak loudly to mask the sound of Chloe moving quietly in the attic above. When my feet finally hit the floor, I turned to face Ethan. He looked exactly the same. Neat, slightly tired, but his eyes were too intense, scanning the closet frantically. What were you actually looking for, Liam? He asked, the roommate veneer dropping away instantly. His tone was cold steel. Chloe told me she was going to talk to you about something tonight. Is that why you were up there? I played dumb, focusing on the textbooks. No, man. What are you talking about? She's not even home. I haven't seen her since dinner. Ethan's eyes narrowed, shifting from me to the half-open hatch above. He started toward the ladder. Get out of the way. This was it. I knew I couldn't stop him physically, but Chloe had prepared for this. Just as Ethan reached for the ladder, Chloe, up in the darkness, let out a piercing, blood-curdling scream, a sound so terrified and agonizing it echoed through the whole building. Ethan froze, shocked, his concentration shattered. What the hell was that? I seized the moment, grabbing my phone and hitting the pre-dialed number Chloe had silently shown me just seconds before going up. That's her, Ethan. She's up there. She was crying about something, about you. And I think she just hurt herself. I shoved past him and ran straight for the front door, shouting, "I'm calling the police." Ethan stared at the dark attic opening, then at the sound of my running feet. The scream, the possibility of discovery, the sudden panic, it worked. He knew the police would unravel his entire plan, whatever it was. Instead of chasing me, he frantically scrambled up the ladder, his priority now clearly silencing or moving his sister. I didn't stop running until I was on the sidewalk, dialing 911 for real. But the final twist came after the cops arrived. They arrested Ethan for assault and theft. The hard drive held evidence of him stealing massive amounts of money from their sick grandfather and framing Chloe for it. But when the police searched the attic, they found no trace of Chloe. The storage space was empty. She wasn't injured. The scream was a perfect, calculated distraction. I had been so focused on saving her from him, I never stopped to ask where she went. Did she climb out onto the roof? Was there another exit? Did she use me just to plant the evidence and escape her brother's reach? I stood outside on the curb that night, watching the flashing red and blue lights paint the front of our quiet apartment complex. The paramedics checked me out, mostly for shock, and the police took my statement. It was a blur of questions. Asterisk, did I know what was on the drive? Had Ethan ever shown signs of this before? Asterisk, I stuck to the story Chloe and I had silently choreographed. I went up to look for textbooks, heard her crying, panicked, and called for help after Ethan went up there looking aggressive. When the lead detective finally let me go, he confirmed that Ethan was being held. The initial evidence on the hard drive, which the police recovered easily once I told them where to look, was damning. Ethan, the pre-med student, had been systematically draining their grandfather's accounts, betting the money, and setting up a digital trail that pointed straight to Chloe, leveraging her distant, artistic reputation. Chloe's creative block wasn't a slump. It was the stress of realizing her own brother was framing her. But the question that kept me up for the next week, the one the police couldn't answer, was the simplest one. Where did Chloe go? She had simply vanished. They found the heavy blanket she'd used in the attic, the tripod, and the burner phone, all pieces of evidence. But there was no sign of a trapdoor, no secondary exit onto the roof. It was like she evaporated into the dust and shadows. My final contact with her came 3 days later. A package arrived for me, an old, heavy envelope with no return address, postmarked from a city hundreds of miles away. Inside, there were 2 things. The first was a handwritten note on the back of a movie ticket stub. It read, asterisk, "Thank you for buying me time. You saved more than just me. Don't worry about the noise. You're good, Liam." Asterisk, the second thing was a crisp, $100 bill folded neatly in half. No explanation, just the cash. I realized the $100 wasn't a payment. It was a way of saying goodbye, a final boundary. She came into my life like a storm, used me to weather the worst of it, planted the necessary truth, and then disappeared back into the wind. My life went back to normal, but I was fundamentally changed. The quiet, predictable routine was permanently scarred by that night. I looked at people differently now, especially Ethan, who was everything he pretended not to be. But I also looked at myself differently. I learned that when faced with real danger, I could step up. I was no longer just the clumsy freshman. I never heard from Chloe again. I often think about her, out there somewhere, finally free to pursue whatever life she was fighting so hard to protect. She was a hurricane of mystery, and I was just the quiet observer who got pulled into her orbit for one terrifying, defining night. She gave me one look, a look that pleaded for help and demanded loyalty, and I followed her to the end of that scary hallway, to the end of that secret story. Maybe that's the real takeaway. Sometimes, the most important people in our lives are the ones who only pass through, leaving behind nothing but an incredible story and the memory of a choice you didn't realize you were brave enough to make. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the apartment, I still glance up at that square patch in the ceiling, wondering if she's just waiting for the next moment to make an impossible escape.